You're listening to The Resistance Report with your hosts, Nick Griffin and Jack Sen.
Greetings, this is Jack Sen, and you're listening to Resistance Radio. I'm joined by Nick Griffin. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Jack.
Okay, well, today I wanted to talk about the global push to normalize transsexualism, gender nonconformity, and non-traditional lifestyles. From morning till night, we are literally being bombarded with images and messages that seek to reprogram how we view the world. In advertising, images of gay men kissing are being used to sell breakfast cereal. Ads that lionize single motherhood and promote gay families are used to sell toothpaste, as ridiculous as that sounds. Optics that undermine the traditional family are everywhere. Television programming, which is supposed to entertain, is being weaponized in order to reprogram us. The education our children receive through their lessons, the books they are required to read at school, are no longer crafted solely to teach them writing and arithmetic, but to reprogram them. The question is, why is this being done, and what's their end game? So, Nick, how would you respond to what their end game is and why they're doing this to us?
Well, certainly I think it's a very good introduction to the problem. The only thing I think to add to it is that when you say we, people need to understand we're not just talking about Britain or the United States. It's not just an Anglosphere problem. The same is going on everywhere in Europe, and anyone who attempts to resist it, such as, say, the Hungarians, the Poles, or the Russians, the European Union, the liberal media in the West, is very, very fast to demonize them and to attack them over this particular subject. So it really is a huge push, and it's all over. It's going over absolutely everywhere.
So what's their end game? What's their end game?
Well, it's cultural Marxism. It's a part of the cultural Marxist war against Western civilization. So to see what the end game is, you had to go back perhaps to the beginning of the game, which was when the revisionist Marxists of the Frankfurt School, having fled Germany and ended up in the United States in the 1930s, they were hardcore communists. Yeah. But they were revising communism as far as they were asking, well, why did the revolution not happen? Because Marx had written that the revolution would come about in the advanced industrialized Western countries first, because it was a historical process. And of course, in the end, it happened in Russia, which was still largely a backward, non-industrialized country. So they asked, why did this happen? And they concluded that the thing that had stopped the revolution in the West, where it was supposed to have happened, was the strength of Christianity in Central and Western Europe, and by extension the United States as well. So they decided that to have their communist revolution, they had to destroy Christianity, Christian morality and traditions before anything else could be done. So they set about doing this, and particularly in the 1960s, with the long march through the institutions. Mm-hmm. Part of what their cadres were supposed to do as soon as they got into a position of power was to attack Christianity and traditional values. And that, of course, is what they're doing. And they've made a great effort to get into positions of power in the advertising media, because they're well aware, after people like Edward Bernays and so on, they're very, very aware that this is the key to changing people's minds in a consumer society.
So cultural Marxism is basically implementing revolution by overthrowing the culture versus economic revolution.
Yes, because their theory is that then the economics and the political power changes after that. But you had to win the cultural battle first. And unfortunately, very few people on the right, on the traditional side, have understood this. Their efforts are all directed at winning elections and so on, whereas large numbers of the left have gone about winning the cultural war, and they've done very well. They've been helped by being able to co-opt a Rainbow Alliance. These are people who, in a communist society, were simply put up against a wall and shot by people like Stalin. But now they see them as very, very good tools for the revolution.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier how they were exiled, or they left Germany in the 1930s, and they actually arrived at Columbia University in New York City, which at the time was probably one of America's probably 5 to 10 most important universities. And then from there, they went on to Hollywood. So they've infected academia in the United States, which of course obviously blows eastward to Britain and Western Europe. And then, of course, via Hollywood, they've infected our minds through the television, film, music videos, and radio. Which is all, you know, and also pornography. And pornography is a Hollywood-based industry. People seem to think it's, some backwater industry in some shanty town somewhere in the South. But in reality, 90% of all American pornography is based in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, and many Hollywood directors who don't make it enter pornography. So the same sorts of ideas they're pushing via film, they're pushing in pornography. Abusive sex. So it's not just, romantic sex between a man and a woman. It's something abusive, something with violence, something that denigrates the white female. Like I said, there's lots of blacks obviously involved in the porn industry as actors, and that's intentional. That's to break down the social mores of a traditional looking couple in even a pornographic setting. As horrific as that sounds, in the 70s you see the old films, and it's typically a white man and a white woman, quite normal looking relationship. Today it's like this massive black guy with this tiny little white girl. The more abusive they can make it, the more they think they can harm the minds of the people watching the films.
Yes, gruesome stuff. I think that there's a tendency, especially amongst Christians, and perhaps especially in the United States, to sort of focus on one particular evil such as pornography, and to fail to see that it's part of an overall big picture. And it's all part of the same drive by the same people to the same ends. And only when you really understand that can you begin to comprehend what's going on, let alone think about, this is being done against us. What can we do in response?
Yeah, precisely. Even cartoons today. I mean, I have a little girl, and I watch cartoons with her. They're just full of propaganda. They try to normalize homosexuality in some of the cartoons you watch. It's quite remarkable. I mean, it's quite subtle. But even a film like Beauty and the Beast, the 2016 version of Beauty and the Beast, there was a gay relationship in that film. When I was a kid, the Beauty and the Beast, I was probably 15 or so when the Beauty and the Beast remake, the first one in the 1990s, late 80s, came out. And that was so innocent. And that was only 25 years ago. And today's Beauty and the Beast has homosexual characters and homosexual storylines.
Vast amounts of obviously miscegenation in all the cartoons and so on, deliberately. And you say it's very subtly done. But no, really and truly, anyone with young children or young grandchildren who leaves the television connected and who allows them to see things other than particularly old films and old series and so on that they've checked beforehand. Anyone who does that is just setting themselves up to lose their children in due course. The brainwashing power of the modern entertainment media is so strong that it's almost impossible for anyone to resist that. And anyone, it doesn't matter whether it's not a matter of traditional Christian morality specifically. Anyone who wants their kids to grow up healthy, normal, decent, has to cut them off from the modern entertainment system. And for that matter, if they don't cut them off from the modern education system, they're probably going to go the same way as well. They're that pernicious.
They are. And in my household, I mean, I monitor obviously what my wife gives my daughter to watch, and we've already stopped her from watching Frozen, which has got some very subtle cues, and it's very kind of anti-male, and although it's minor, it pokes fun at the male character to such an extent where you almost feel uncomfortable watching it. As a male, I feel as though the male character is being attacked constantly, and it might seem silly, but that's what they're doing. They're normalizing this idea that somehow the father figure can be turned into a buffoon. Even, and this might sound ridiculous, but even Peppa Pig, and it sounds quite silly because I know Peppa Pig is almost like a iconic figure on the right in the sense that a lot of Muslims don't seem to like Peppa Pig, so they say, let's save Peppa Pig. But if you watch that program, the mother is intelligent and she knows where to, she knows how to navigate the vehicle. The father is a buffoon. He's overweight, and the kids constantly refer to him as silly. And my daughter started referring to me as silly after watching Peppa Pig, and I said, I'm not going for silly. I'm not silly daddy. I'm smart daddy. I'm good daddy. I'm not silly daddy. And although it's only subtle and it seems ridiculous, this idea that daddy is silly is part of cultural Marxism. The denigration of the father figure, the undermining of the father figure.
Yeah, and it's the very point that it is quite silly, and therefore there's no need to resist it.
Yeah.
So people don't. But that's the power, because it's the power of water dripping on a stone to wear the stone away.
Precisely.
To hear part 2 of this interview, please become a paid member of Resistance Radio.
The suicides of musicians Chris Cornell, the lead singer of Soundgarden, and Chester Bennington, lead singer from Linkin Park, as well as the death of Stone Temple Pilots Scott Weiland, impacted me a great deal. I grew up listening to all of their music. The music world, the world in general, lost 3 incredible talents. Their families lost 3 caring fathers. And I lost 3 of my favorite singers. It's fair to say that all 3 of these men were deeply tortured souls who turned to hard drugs and alcohol when the horrific things they experienced as children got on top of them. The right will immediately attribute their deaths to immorality and lifestyle choice. In the left, the impact of substance abuse, mental health issues, and the usual lack of treatment options for both. But both are wrong. As I'm neither a Christian conservative or a liberal, I'm able to look at these cases objectively, relying on evidence rather than succumbing to dogma. The deaths of these brilliant musicians can be attributed to how society continues to fail young men, how years of same-sex sexual abuse, something that both Scott Weiland and Chester Bennington experienced, and Chris Cornell was rumored to have as well, often result in crippling depression, even suicide. Chester Bennington said that the same-sex sexual abuse left him shattered and vulnerable. He felt alone, and his life was without meaning, that he only regained his confidence when he began self-medicating with alcohol and drugs. In young men, emotional damage caused by familial dysfunction, depression, the side effects of psychiatric medication, being born into a society and system that's literally rigged against you from day one. In the cases of Bennington and Weiland, they are being victims of gay sexual abuse. Rape perpetrated against young boys by older homosexual males leads to crippling depression and suicide. Suicide rates in young men that have been raped by gay males is 14 times higher than the national average. 14. Rates aren't as high for other types of molestation, although they are as equally abhorrent. As children, both Bennington and Weiland were sexually abused by older men known to them, and there's no denying that, and the impact of the abuse is well documented. In his book, Not Dead and Not for Sale, and in several published interviews since, Scott Weiland told of how he was raped as a 12-year-old by a high school senior who Weiland claimed identified as a homosexual. This man began preying upon him on the school bus, targeting him because of the way he looked. First he would compliment Weiland, and then he invited him back to his home. Weiland then wrote, "At that point the dude raped me. It was quick, not pleasant, and I was too scared to tell anyone. There were threats of violence and bullying." Lincoln Park's Chester Bennington reported that he too was abused by an older male. With Bennington, the abuse started even earlier, when the singer was just 7 years of age. Bennington described the perpetrator as a friend of high school age, again, an older male in high school. In an interview last year, Bennington said that things quickly escalated from a touchy, curious thing due to his feeling that he too may be gay to being something far more destructive. Again, Bennington was 7. Forget what public schools tell you. A 7-year-old does not recognize the sexuality, and curiosity is not normal. Bennington then told Kerrang! Magazine that his gay friend's sexual curiosity, that undoubtedly had been piqued by sex ed courses in school that normalized sex amongst children, led to further experimentation. Bennington continued, "Curiosity led to, what does this thing do?" which eventually led to full-on, quote, crazy violations. I was getting beaten up and being forced to do things I didn't want to. I was 7. It destroyed my self-confidence. Like most people, I was so afraid to say anything. I was too afraid to say anything. I didn't want people to think I was gay either, or that I was lying. Again, Bennington was 7 years old, and this was a high school student that was preying upon him, another male. Bennington continued, "The perpetrator treated me as though he owned me. He would harm me in ways I could not even explain to this day. I had no way to report him as I was scared." The abuse continued until Bennington was 13, some 6 years after it started. It impacted him so much that he, quote, felt the urge to kill everything and run away. That was from the interview in Kerrang! Magazine. To comfort himself, Bennington drew pictures. He wrote poetry and songs. Later he revealed the abuser's identity to his father, a police detective, but chose not to press charges after he learned the abuser himself was a victim of same-sex sexual abuse. Left-wing indoctrination and the idea that perpetrators are victims themselves clouded Bennington's judgment. As society continues to demand decent people tolerate the intolerable, accept behaviors that were often criminalized just 40 to 50 years ago, aggressive pedophiles and pederasts feel empowered. With the rise of gay rape, we see a rise in suicides. It was reported that Chester Bennington's silence was made worse as his parents divorced. And that is often the case, sadly. Children in fatherless homes where the father is outside the home are oftentimes raped. It seems that is the key statistic.
You're listening to Resistance Radio. You're listening to Resistance Radio.